This audiobook is written and presented by MindForge Audiobooks. Introduction. You feel like you are in control of your thoughts. Every idea, every decision, every reaction, it all seems like something you consciously choose. It feels natural to believe that your mind is fully under your control. But the truth is more complex and, for many people, more uncomfortable. Because most of your thinking is not as conscious as it feels. There is an illusion of control. Your mind creates thoughts automatically. They appear without effort, without permission, and often without awareness. You do not sit and choose your next thought. It simply shows up. And once it appears, you accept it as your own. This is how the illusion is maintained. Behind the scenes, there is a hidden system running your mind. A system shaped by past experiences, emotions, habits, and patterns you have repeated over time. This system works fast, silently influencing what you think, how you feel, and how you respond to the world. By the time you become aware of a thought, much of the process has already happened. That realization can feel unsettling. If you are not fully controlling your thoughts, then what is? And how many of your decisions have been shaped by something you never noticed? But this discomfort is not a weakness. It is a turning point. Because once you see this clearly, you gain something powerful: awareness. And awareness changes everything. In this audiobook, you will discover how your mind actually works. You will understand why thoughts appear automatically, how your subconscious influences your decisions, and why you often react before you think. More importantly, you will learn how to take back real control, not by trying to control every thought, but by learning how to respond to them. Because the truth is simple: you may not control every thought, but you can control what you do next. Chapter 1. Thoughts happen automatically. You don't choose your thoughts, they appear. One moment your mind is quiet, and the next a thought shows up. It could be random, emotional, logical, or even completely unrelated to what you were doing. But you did not consciously create it. It simply arrived. This is the first truth you need to understand. Thoughts arise without permission. You do not sit and decide, "Now I will think this." It happens automatically. And because this process feels natural, you rarely question it. You assume that because the thought is in your mind, it must be yours, something you chose. But that is not how your brain works. Your brain is constantly active, even when you are not aware of it. It processes information, connects patterns, recalls memories, and predicts outcomes, all in the background. In many ways, your brain acts like a prediction machine. It is always trying to anticipate what will happen next. Based on your past experiences, it generates thoughts that prepare you for possible situations. If something feels familiar, your brain predicts what it means. If something feels uncertain, your brain tries to fill the gap with assumptions. This process is fast, so fast that you do not notice it. By the time a thought reaches your awareness, it has already been created. This is why you don't choose your first thought. It appears before you have the chance to decide. For example, imagine someone says something unexpected to you. Before you can analyze it, a thought appears. That was rude. Why did they say that? Something is wrong. These thoughts feel immediate, and they are, because they come from your brain's automatic processing, not from deliberate thinking. Your conscious mind only becomes aware after the thought has already formed. This is important, because it means your initial reaction is not fully under your control, but your response is. There is a difference between experiencing a thought and acting on it. Most people do not see that difference. They identify with every thought that appears. If a negative thought comes, they believe it. If a fearful thought appears, they follow it. If a judgment forms, they accept it as truth. This is identification. You treat your thoughts as facts. You assume they represent reality. You believe they define you. But thoughts are not always accurate. They are influenced by your past, your emotions, your habits, and your environment. They are shaped by patterns your brain has learned, not necessarily by objective truth. And if you do not question them, They control your behavior. This is where awareness becomes important. Instead of identifying with your thoughts, you can begin to observe them. Observation is different. When you observe a thought, you do not immediately accept it. You notice it. You recognize it as something appearing in your mind. You create a small distance. For example, instead of thinking, "I am not good enough," you begin to notice, "I am having the thought that I am not good enough." That shift may seem small, but it changes everything. Because now you are not inside the thought, you are observing it. You are no longer fully controlled by it. This is the beginning of mental clarity. When you observe your thoughts, you start to see patterns. You notice that certain thoughts repeat. You recognize triggers that lead to specific thinking. You begin to understand that many of your thoughts are predictable. And once you see that, they lose some of their power. You realize that not every thought needs to be followed. Some can be ignored. Some can be questioned. Some can simply pass without action. But this requires practice. Your mind is used to reacting automatically. It is used to accepting thoughts without question. So at first, observing may feel difficult. You may forget. You may get caught in the thought. You may react before you notice. That is normal. The goal is not to stop thoughts. That is impossible. The goal is to change your relationship with them. Instead of being controlled by every thought, you become aware of them. You begin to choose which ones to engage with. And that is where control starts. Not in creating thoughts, but in responding to them. Another important thing to understand is that the brain's prediction system is not perfect. It is designed for efficiency, not accuracy. It prefers speed over precision. It fills gaps quickly. It makes assumptions. It simplifies complex situations. This is useful for survival. But it can also lead to errors. You may assume something is negative when it is not. You may expect failure based on past experiences. You may interpret situations incorrectly, and because these thoughts appear automatically, they feel true. But they are not always reliable. This is why observation is powerful. It gives you the chance to question, is this thought accurate? Or is this just a pattern? This question creates awareness, and awareness gives you space. Space to pause, space to think, space to respond differently. Over time, this changes how you experience your mind. You stop feeling overwhelmed by your thoughts. You stop reacting to every idea that appears. You become more stable, more clear, more intentional. You still have thoughts. They still appear automatically. But they no longer control you in the same way. Because now you understand something most people never realize. You are not the source of every thought. You are the observer of them. And once you see that, you gain something powerful. Not control over every thought, but control over what you do next. And that is where real change begins. Chapter 2. The subconscious mind is in charge. You believe your conscious mind is in control. It feels like you are thinking, deciding, and acting with full awareness. You analyze situations, weigh options, and make choices. That is what it feels like. But most of the time, that is not what is actually happening, because the subconscious mind is in charge. To understand this, you need to see the difference between two systems: the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Your conscious mind is the part you are aware of. It is slow, logical, and deliberate. It is where you think through problems, make plans, and try to make rational decisions. But it has limits. It can only focus on a small amount of information at once. It requires effort. It gets tired. The subconscious mind works differently. It is fast, automatic, and always active. It processes huge amounts of information without effort. It stores habits, memories, emotions, and learned behaviors. And most importantly, it runs most of your life. Studies and observations suggest that a large percentage of your thinking, often described as around 95%, is automatic. That means the majority of your actions, reactions, and decisions are influenced by subconscious patterns, not conscious reasoning. You do not think through every step of what you do. You do not consciously decide how to walk, how to speak, how to react in familiar situations. These are handled automatically. Your brain prefers it this way because it saves energy. If you had to consciously think about every action, you would be overwhelmed. So your brain creates shortcuts, patterns that allow you to act quickly without thinking deeply. These patterns become habits. A habit is simply a repeated behavior that has been stored in your subconscious. At first, the behavior requires effort. You think about it. You focus on it. You practice it. But over time, it becomes automatic. You no longer need to think about it. This is useful for positive behaviors. But the same process applies to negative ones. If you repeatedly react with stress, that becomes a pattern. If you avoid challenges, that becomes a pattern. If you overthink, that becomes a pattern. Your subconscious learns from repetition. It does not judge what is good or bad. It simply records what you do most often and turns it into a default response. This is how habits and patterns control your behavior. When a situation appears, your subconscious mind recognizes it. It matches it to past experiences. It selects a familiar response, and it acts quickly, before your conscious mind has time to fully engage. This is why you sometimes act without thinking. You say something and regret it later. You react emotionally before understanding the situation. You make a decision and then question it afterward, because the action came first, and awareness came later. This is a key point. Awareness often comes after action. Your subconscious initiates the response. Your conscious mind becomes aware afterward. Then it tries to explain what happened. This is why you feel like you are in control. Because your conscious mind creates a story. It says, I chose this. I decided this. This makes sense. But in many cases, the process started before that explanation. Your conscious mind is not always the decision maker. It is often the narrator. It observes what has already happened and then creates meaning. This can be surprising because it challenges the idea of full control. But it also explains a lot. It explains why habits are hard to break, why you repeat the same behaviors, why change feels difficult. You are not just changing a decision. You are changing a pattern stored in your subconscious. And that pattern is strong because it has been repeated many times. The subconscious prefers what is familiar. It follows known paths. It avoids uncertainty. It repeats what has worked before, even if it is not helpful now. This is why you may stay in situations that are not good for you, because they are familiar. Your subconscious sees familiarity as safe, even if it limits you. To change this, you need awareness, because awareness is the only way to bring the subconscious into the conscious. When you become aware of a pattern, you interrupt it. You begin to see what is happening. You notice your reactions. You recognize your habits. You observe your automatic behaviors. This creates a shift. Instead of acting automatically, you begin to pause. And in that pause, your conscious mind has a chance to participate. This is where change begins. Not by trying to control the subconscious directly, but by becoming aware of it. Each time you notice a pattern, you weaken its automatic control. Each time you choose a different response, you begin to create a new pattern. This process takes time, because patterns are built through repetition, and they are changed the same way, through repeated awareness and intentional action. At first, it requires effort. You have to notice. You have to pause. You have to choose differently. But over time, the new behavior becomes easier. It starts to feel natural. And eventually, it becomes automatic. This is how you reshape your subconscious, not by force, but by repetition. You replace old patterns with new ones, and those new patterns begin to guide your behavior. The goal is not to eliminate the subconscious. You need it. It allows you to function efficiently, but you do not want it to control you completely. You want balance. You want awareness. You want your conscious mind to guide your direction, while your subconscious supports it. Because when you understand how your mind works, something changes. You stop blaming yourself for automatic reactions. You start understanding them. And once you understand them, you can begin to change them, because the subconscious may be in charge by default. But with awareness, you can take that control back. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Control. You believe you are choosing your thoughts. It feels like you are in charge, deciding what to think, what to believe, and how to respond. When a thought appears, it feels like it belongs to you, like you created it intentionally. But much of that control is an illusion. Your brain is designed to make you feel in control, even when most of the process happens automatically. This sense of control creates stability. It allows you to function without constantly questioning every thought and decision, but it also hides what is really happening. Because many of your thoughts are not chosen, they are generated. They arise from patterns, past experiences, emotions, and subconscious processing, and by the time you notice them, they have already formed. So why do they feel like your choice? Because your brain creates a story. After a thought appears or a decision is made, your mind explains it. It builds a logical narrative that makes the process feel intentional. This happens so quickly that you do not notice the gap. You simply feel like, I decided this, I chose this. This makes sense. But in many cases, the explanation comes after the action. The brain creates stories after decisions. This is one of the most important ideas to understand. Your mind acts first, then it explains. For example, you might make a quick decision, buy something, respond emotionally, or judge a situation. In that moment, it feels natural. Then your mind steps in and justifies it. I needed this. They deserved that reaction. This was the best choice. But the decision was already made. The explanation is added later. This is known as reaction first, explanation later. It happens constantly. You react to situations based on patterns. You respond emotionally based on past experiences. You make quick judgments based on limited information. Then your conscious mind creates a reason. It fills in the gap. This is why your thinking feels logical, even when it is not fully deliberate, because your brain is very good at creating convincing explanations. At the center of this process is something often described as the narrator inside your mind. The narrator is the voice you hear when you think. It comments on your actions. It explains your decisions. It gives meaning to your experiences. It feels like you, but it is not always in control. It is often observing and interpreting what has already happened. Imagine watching a movie. The events happen on the screen. Then a narrator explains what is happening, giving it context and meaning. Your mind works in a similar way. The subconscious processes information and generates reactions. Then the narrator steps in and explains those reactions. Because the explanation sounds logical, you believe it. You assume the narrator was in control the whole time. But it was not. It arrived after the action began. This is why the illusion is so strong. You do not see the process. You only hear the explanation. And because the explanation feels coherent, you trust it. But this can be misleading, because the narrator does not always tell the full truth. It simplifies. It justifies. It protects your sense of identity. If something goes wrong, it may shift blame. If you make a mistake, it may create a reason. If you react emotionally, it may justify the reaction. Not to deceive you, but to maintain consistency. Your brain wants your experiences to make sense, even if that sense is incomplete. This is why you can feel certain about something, and later realize you were wrong. Because the initial explanation felt convincing, but it was based on limited awareness. Understanding this changes how you see your thoughts. You begin to notice that not every explanation is accurate. You start to question the narrator. Instead of immediately believing your thoughts, you observe them. You ask, did I truly choose this? Or did this reaction happen automatically? Is this explanation accurate or just convenient? These questions create awareness. They help you see the gap between reaction and explanation. And in that gap, you find something important: choice. Because while you may not control the first thought, you can influence what happens next. When you become aware of the narrator, you gain distance. You no longer accept every explanation without question. You begin to separate what happened from how your mind describes it. This allows you to respond more intentionally. Instead of reacting and then justifying, you can pause and choose. You can notice the initial reaction. You can observe the explanation forming. And you can decide whether to follow it. This is where real control begins, not in controlling every thought, but in recognizing how thoughts are created and choosing how to respond to them. Over time, this awareness becomes stronger. You notice your reactions earlier. You question your explanations more often. You rely less on automatic thinking. The narrator is still there. It still speaks, but it no longer has full authority. It becomes a tool, not a controller. You listen to it, but you do not blindly follow it. And that changes everything, because the illusion of control is replaced with something more powerful, conscious awareness. You may not choose every thought, but you can choose how much you believe it. And that is where real control begins. Chapter 4. Emotions drive your thinking. You believe you think first, then feel, but in reality, it works the other way around. You feel first, then you think. Emotions arrive quickly, often instantly. Before your logical mind has time to analyze a situation, your emotional system has already reacted. This reaction shapes how you see the situation, what you focus on, and what you do next. This is why feelings come before logic. Your brain is designed this way for speed. In earlier environments, quick emotional responses helped you survive. There was no time to analyze every detail. You needed to react fast. That system still exists today. But now, it influences decisions that require clarity and patience, money, relationships, opportunities, and long-term choices. And this is where problems begin. Because when emotions lead, logic often follows behind, not to decide, but to justify. Think about a moment when you made a decision that felt right immediately. Maybe you bought something impulsively. Maybe you reacted strongly in a conversation. Maybe you avoided something important. In that moment, you did not carefully analyze the situation. You felt something, and that feeling drove your action. Afterward, your mind created a reason. I deserved it. It made sense. It was the right thing to do. But the decision came from emotion. This pattern is especially strong with fear, anxiety, and impulse. Fear is one of the most powerful emotional drivers. When fear appears, your body prepares for action. Your focus narrows. Your thinking becomes protective. You do not think about long-term outcomes. You think about immediate safety. This is why fear often leads to avoidance. You avoid risks. You avoid challenges. You stay where things feel familiar, and your mind supports it. It's not the right time. I need more preparation. I should wait. These explanations sound logical, but they are often emotional responses in disguise. Fear is not asking, what is the best decision? It is asking, what feels safe right now? Anxiety works in a similar way. It creates constant uncertainty. It makes you overanalyze. It makes you question your decisions. It makes you imagine negative outcomes. Under anxiety, your thinking becomes focused on what could go wrong. This leads to hesitation. You delay action. You think more but do less. You search for certainty that never fully comes. Again, it feels logical. You tell yourself you are being careful. But in reality, anxiety is controlling your thinking. Then there is impulse. Impulse pushes you in the opposite direction. Instead of hesitation, it creates urgency. You feel a strong desire, and you act quickly. No pause, no analysis, just action. This can happen with spending, reactions, or decisions. And just like fear and anxiety, your mind explains it afterward. I wanted it. It felt right. It wasn't a big deal. But the action was emotional. This is how emotional shortcuts work. Your brain uses emotions to make fast decisions. Instead of analyzing every detail, it relies on how something feels. If it feels good, you move toward it. If it feels bad, you move away. This saves time. but it reduces accuracy. Because feelings are not always reliable indicators of truth. They are influenced by your past, your environment, and your current state. Something may feel dangerous, but actually be an opportunity. Something may feel comfortable, but limit your growth. This is why emotional decision-making can lead to patterns you repeat. You choose what feels familiar. You avoid what feels uncertain. You follow what feels good in the moment. And over time, these choices shape your life. The most important part to understand is this: logic often justifies feelings. After an emotional reaction, your mind creates a logical explanation. It builds a story that supports what you already feel. This makes your decisions seem reasonable, but the reasoning comes after the emotion. This is why people can strongly believe in decisions that are not fully logical, because the belief is supported by emotion, and emotion is powerful. It feels real, it feels convincing, it feels true. But feeling true does not mean being true. This is where awareness becomes important. You cannot remove emotions. They are part of being human, but you can change how you respond to them. The key is to create space. Space between feeling and action. The next time you feel a strong emotion, pause. Do not act immediately. Do not speak instantly. Do not decide right away. Instead, observe. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Is this emotion helping me think clearly? This simple pause slows the process. It gives your logical mind time to engage. You begin to separate the emotion from the decision. You can still feel fear, but not avoid automatically. You can still feel anxiety, but not delay endlessly. You can still feel impulse, but not act immediately. This is the shift. You move from being controlled by emotion to being guided by awareness. Over time, this becomes easier. You recognize emotional triggers faster. You pause more naturally. You respond more intentionally. Your decisions become more balanced. Not emotion alone, not logic alone, but both working together. Because emotions are not the enemy. They provide information. They highlight what matters. They signal what feels important. But they should not make decisions on their own. They need to be understood, not followed blindly. When you combine emotion with awareness, something changes. You stop reacting automatically. You start choosing intentionally. And that changes the quality of your decisions. Because you are no longer driven only by what you feel in the moment. You are guided by what makes sense in the long run. And that is how you take back control. Chapter 5. Your past is thinking for you. You believe you are thinking about the present. But much of your thinking comes from the past. Every experience you've had, every success, failure, fear, and moment of learning has shaped the way your mind works. These experiences do not disappear. They are stored as patterns, and those patterns influence how you think today. This is why your past is still active, not as memories you consciously recall, but as patterns that guide your thoughts automatically. Experiences shape thought patterns. When something happens repeatedly, your brain learns from it. It looks for connections, builds associations, and creates expectations. If you've experienced rejection, your brain becomes more alert to signs of it. If you've faced failure, your mind may begin to expect it. If something brought you comfort, your brain will try to repeat it. These patterns are useful. They help your brain predict situations quickly. They reduce the need for constant analysis. They allow you to respond faster. But they are not always accurate, because your brain is not asking what is true right now. It is asking what has happened before. And it uses that answer to shape your thinking. This is how memory influences perception. When you face a situation, your brain does not see it as completely new. It compares it to past experiences. If something feels similar, your brain assumes it is the same. It fills in the gaps. For example, if someone speaks in a certain tone, your brain may connect it to a past negative experience. If you enter a situation that once made you uncomfortable, your body may react before you understand why. You are not just seeing the present. You are seeing the present through the lens of your past. This process is fast and automatic. You do not consciously choose it. You simply experience the result. And because it feels immediate, it feels real. But your perception is not neutral. It is influenced. This is why two people can experience the same situation and interpret it differently. One sees opportunity. Another sees risk. One feels confident. Another feels uncertain. The situation is the same. The past is different, and the past shapes the present experience. This leads to a powerful pattern, repeating old reactions in new situations. When your brain recognizes something familiar, it activates a learned response. You react based on what you've done before, even if the situation is not exactly the same. For example, you may react defensively because you've been hurt before. You may avoid a challenge because you failed in the past. You may hesitate because you expect the same outcome. These reactions feel natural because they are familiar, but they are not always appropriate. You are responding to the past, not the present. This is how patterns repeat. The same triggers lead to the same reactions. The same reactions lead to the same outcomes, and those outcomes reinforce the original pattern. This creates a cycle. You expect something. You react based on that expectation. You experience a result, and that result strengthens your belief. Over time, this cycle becomes strong. You stop questioning it. You begin to assume that your reactions are correct. You believe that what you expect is what will happen. This is what it means to live in past-based thinking. You are not fully present. You are interpreting the present through past experiences. This limits your thinking. It narrows your perspective. It keeps you repeating familiar patterns, even when they no longer serve you. You may feel stuck, not because your situation cannot change, but because your thinking has not changed. Your brain continues to use old information to guide new decisions. Breaking this pattern begins with awareness. You need to recognize when your past is influencing your present. The next time you react strongly, pause. Ask yourself, is this response based on what is happening now? Or is it influenced by something from before? This question creates distance. It helps you separate past from present. You begin to see that not every reaction is about the current situation. Some are echoes of previous experiences. This awareness gives you a choice. You can still feel the reaction, but you do not have to follow it automatically. You can pause. You can observe. You can choose a different response. This is how you break the cycle, not by erasing the past, but by changing how it influences you. You also begin to question your assumptions. Instead of assuming the same outcome, you consider new possibilities. Instead of expecting failure, you allow for a different result. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond intentionally. Over time, this creates new patterns. You experience different outcomes. Those outcomes reshape your expectations, and your thinking begins to change. This process takes time, because past patterns are strong. They have been built through repetition, but they are not permanent. They can be updated. Each time you choose a new response, you weaken the old pattern. Each time you act differently, you create new evidence. And that evidence begins to replace your old expectations. You move from past-based thinking to present-based awareness. You stop assuming. You start observing. You stop reacting automatically. You start choosing intentionally. Your past will always be part of you. It will always influence your thinking to some extent, but it does not have to control you. You are not limited to repeating what has already happened. You can respond differently. You can create new patterns. You can shape your thinking in a new direction, because your past may influence your thoughts, but it does not have to decide your future. Chapter 6. Cognitive Biases. Control Perception. You believe you see the world clearly. You trust your judgment. You assume your decisions are based on logic, evidence, and careful thinking. But your brain does not process information in a perfectly objective way. It uses shortcuts. These shortcuts are called cognitive biases, mental patterns that help you think faster, but often lead you away from accuracy. They simplify complex information. They reduce effort. They help you make quick decisions, but they also distort reality. Instead of showing you the world as it is, your brain shows you a version of it, filtered, shaped, and sometimes misleading. One of the most powerful biases is confirmation bias. This is your tendency to see what you already believe. Once you form a belief, your brain starts looking for evidence that supports it. At the same time, it ignores or minimizes information that challenges it. You are not searching for truth. You are searching for agreement. For example, if you believe something will fail, you focus on signs that confirm that belief. You notice the risks, the problems, the doubts. If you believe something will succeed, you focus on positive signals. You notice the opportunities, the strengths, the possibilities. In both cases, your perception is shaped by your belief, not by objective reality. This creates a loop. You believe something, you look for confirming evidence, you find it, your belief becomes stronger. Over time, this makes your thinking more rigid. You become less open to new information. You resist opposing views. You stay within your existing perspective. This is why people can hold strong beliefs even when there is evidence against them, because their brain filters what they see. Another important bias is availability bias. This is the tendency to believe that what is most recent or vivid is most important. Your brain gives more weight to information that is easy to recall. If you recently heard about a negative event, it feels more common than it actually is. If something is repeated often, it feels more true. For example, if you see frequent news about accidents, you may feel that the world is more dangerous than it really is. If you hear about a successful story, you may overestimate how easy success is. Your perception is influenced by what is available in your memory, not by accurate data. This bias can affect your decisions. You may avoid something because it feels risky, even if the actual risk is low. You may pursue something because it feels common, even if it is rare. Your brain is not calculating probabilities. It is relying on what comes to mind quickly. This makes your thinking faster, but less precise. Then there is the overconfidence illusion. This is the belief that you understand more than you actually do. You feel certain about your knowledge. You trust your judgment. You believe your decisions are accurate. But that confidence is not always based on full understanding. Your brain simplifies complex situations. It creates a clear story, even when the information is incomplete. And because the story feels clear, you feel confident. This can lead to mistakes. You may underestimate risks. You may ignore important details. You may make decisions without enough information. Overconfidence reduces your willingness to question yourself. You stop asking, "What am I missing? What could be wrong?" Instead, you assume you are right, and that assumption limits your thinking. All of these biases come from one core idea. Your brain prefers shortcuts over truth. Processing information accurately requires effort. It takes time. It requires attention. It involves uncertainty. But your brain is designed to save energy, so it uses shortcuts. It simplifies information. It fills in gaps. It makes quick judgments. These shortcuts are efficient, but they are not always accurate. They create a version of reality that is easy to process, not necessarily true. This is why you may feel certain about something and still be wrong, because your certainty is based on a filtered view. Understanding this does not mean your thinking is useless. It means your thinking has limits, and those limits need awareness. When you recognize cognitive biases, you begin to question your perception. Instead of assuming you are right, you become curious. You ask, "Is this the full picture? What might I be overlooking? Am I seeing this clearly or through a bias?" These questions create clarity. They slow down automatic thinking. They help you move from assumption to observation. You also become more open. You consider different perspectives. You listen more carefully. You allow new information to challenge your beliefs. This does not make you uncertain, it makes you more accurate. Because now, your thinking is not just fast, it is thoughtful. Another important shift is learning to separate feeling from fact. Just because something feels true does not mean it is true. Your brain can make something feel convincing, even when it is incomplete. By questioning your thoughts, you reduce this effect. You begin to see your thinking as a process, not a final answer. And this gives you more control, because you are no longer blindly following your perception. You are examining it. Over time, this changes how you make decisions. You become less reactive, more aware, more balanced. You still use shortcuts when needed, but you also know when to slow down, when to question, when to look deeper. This balance is important, because your brain will always use biases. You cannot remove them completely, but you can reduce their influence. You can become aware of them, and awareness allows you to think more clearly. Because once you understand that your perception is not perfect, you stop treating it as absolute truth, and that is the first step toward better thinking. Not faster, but more accurate. Not automatic, but intentional. Because the goal is not to eliminate your brain's shortcuts. It is to stop letting them control you. Chapter 7. Social programming shapes your mind. You believe your thoughts are your own, but much of what you think, believe, and value has been shaped by the world around you. From the moment you are born, you are influenced. Your family, your culture, your education, your friends, and even the content you consume every day, all of these shape how you see the world. They influence what you believe is normal, what you think is possible, and how you judge yourself and others. This is social programming. It happens slowly, quietly, and most of the time, without your awareness. The influence of environment and society is powerful because it feels natural. You grow up seeing certain behaviors, hearing certain ideas, and experiencing certain expectations. Over time, these patterns become familiar, and what is familiar begins to feel true. You don't question it, you accept it. For example, if you grow up in an environment where risk is avoided, you may develop a fear of trying new things. If you are surrounded by people who doubt themselves, you may begin to think the same way. If success is defined in a certain way, you may chase it, even if it doesn't align with you. You are not consciously choosing these beliefs. You are absorbing them. And once they are absorbed, they become part of your thinking. This is why two people from different environments can see the same situation in completely different ways. Their programming is different, and that programming shapes their perception. One of the strongest effects of social programming is comparison. You constantly compare yourself to others, their success, their appearance, their lifestyle. This comparison often happens automatically. You scroll through content, you observe people around you, you measure yourself against what you see, and without realizing it, you begin to judge yourself. Am I doing enough? Am I good enough? Why are they ahead of me? This is the comparison trap. It shifts your focus from your own path to someone else's. Instead of thinking independently, you start measuring your value based on external standards, and those standards are often unrealistic. You are comparing your reality to someone else's highlight. You see their results, not their process, their success, not their struggle. But your brain does not see the full picture. It simply compares, and that comparison affects your thinking. It can lower your confidence. It can create pressure. It can push you toward decisions that are not truly yours. Along with comparison comes the need for validation. You begin to look for approval from others, from society, from external sources. You want your choices to be accepted. You want your actions to be approved. And this influences your behavior. You may choose what is popular instead of what is right for you. You may stay silent to avoid judgment. You may follow trends instead of your own direction. This is the validation trap. It makes your thinking dependent on others. Instead of asking, "What do I think?" you start asking, "What will others think?" And that changes everything, because now your decisions are not fully yours. They are shaped by external expectations. Another powerful force is herd mentality. Humans naturally follow groups. When many people believe something, it feels correct. When many people do something, it feels safe. This is not always logical. It is psychological. Your brain associates numbers with certainty. If many people agree, it must be true. If many people act, It must be right. But this is not always accurate. Groups can be wrong. Trends can be misleading. Popular opinions can lack depth. But because you are influenced by the group, you may follow without questioning. You adopt ideas. You repeat beliefs. You make decisions based on what others are doing. This reduces independent thinking. You stop analyzing deeply. You rely on social signals. This makes life easier. But it also limits your perspective because you are not thinking for yourself. You are following. Breaking free from social programming does not mean rejecting everything around you. It means becoming aware of its influence. You begin to ask, is this belief truly mine? Or did I learn it from others? Am I choosing this? Or am I following what feels expected? These questions create clarity. They help you separate your own thinking from external influence. You start to recognize patterns. You notice when you are comparing. You notice when you are seeking validation. You notice when you are following the crowd. And once you notice, you have a choice. You can continue the pattern, or you can change it. Independent thinking begins with awareness. It requires you to pause, to question, to reflect. Instead of accepting ideas automatically, you examine them. You consider different perspectives. You evaluate what makes sense to you. You decide based on your own understanding. This does not mean you ignore others. It means you do not depend on them for direction. You listen, but you decide. You observe, but you choose. This builds confidence, because your decisions are no longer based on approval. They are based on understanding. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, because going against the crowd creates uncertainty. You may feel different. You may face disagreement. You may question yourself. But this discomfort is part of growth, because independent thinking requires courage. It requires you to trust your own judgment. Over time, this becomes easier. You rely less on comparison. You seek less validation. You follow your own direction, and your thinking becomes clearer, not because the world changes, but because your relationship with it changes. You are no longer shaped entirely by your environment. You are aware of its influence, and that awareness gives you control, because while society may shape your thinking, it does not have to define it. Chapter 8. Overthinking is not control. Thinking feels like control. When your mind is busy analyzing, comparing, and evaluating, it gives the impression that you are being careful. It feels like you are taking responsibility, like you are trying to make the best possible decision. But thinking more does not always mean thinking better. In many cases, it creates confusion. You start with a simple decision. You want clarity, so you begin to think it through. You consider options. You imagine outcomes. You weigh risks and benefits. At first, this seems helpful, but as you continue, something changes. Instead of becoming clearer, your mind becomes more crowded. New possibilities appear. New doubts arise. New questions replace old answers. The more you think, the more uncertain you feel. This is because your brain is trying to eliminate uncertainty. It wants a perfect answer, a guaranteed outcome, a decision with no risk. But that does not exist. Every decision has unknowns. And when you try to remove all uncertainty, your thinking becomes endless. This is why thinking more creates confusion. You are not moving closer to clarity. You are expanding the number of possibilities, and more possibilities mean more doubt. This leads to a common pattern: paralysis by analysis. You are not stuck because you lack information. You are stuck because you have too much of it, and no decision. You keep analyzing, you keep reviewing, you keep delaying. You tell yourself, I need more time. I need to be sure. I need to think this through. But in reality, you are avoiding the moment of action. Overthinking becomes a form of protection. It protects you from making a mistake. It protects you from facing uncertainty. It protects you from responsibility. As long as you are thinking, you are not acting. And as long as you are not acting, you are not risking failure. But you are also not making progress. This is the hidden cost. Overthinking feels productive, but it keeps you in the same place. You remain in your head. You imagine outcomes instead of experiencing them. You plan instead of moving. Over time, this affects your confidence. Every delay sends a message. I am not ready. I am not sure. I cannot decide. That message repeats, and eventually it becomes your identity. You start seeing yourself as someone who hesitates, someone who needs certainty, someone who struggles to act. But the truth is simple. Clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from doing. Action provides information. It shows you what works, what does not, what needs to change. Without action, you are relying on assumptions, and assumptions can only take you so far. You cannot fully understand a situation by thinking about it. You understand it by experiencing it. This is why action creates clarity. When you act, you get feedback. You see real results instead of imagined outcomes. You learn from reality instead of possibility. This reduces confusion, because now your thinking is based on experience, not just ideas. To break the pattern of overthinking, you need a shift, not in how much you think, but in how long you think. Set a limit. Give yourself a short time to consider your options, then decide. This forces your mind to focus. It prevents endless looping. It trains you to move forward. You also need to accept imperfection. No decision will be perfect. There will always be risk. There will always be unknowns. Waiting for certainty is a way of avoiding action. Instead, aim for a good enough decision, one that allows you to move. You can adjust later. You can learn as you go. You can improve with experience, but you cannot improve a decision you never make. Another important step is recognizing when thinking becomes repetitive. If you are reviewing the same points again and again, you are no longer gaining insight. You are looping. That is your signal to act, not because you are fully ready, but because you have thought enough. Over time, this changes your relationship with thinking. You stop using it as a hiding place. You start using it as a tool. You think to understand, then you act to learn. This balance is important, because thinking has value, but only when it leads to action. Without action, thinking becomes a trap. With action, thinking becomes guidance. You do not need to eliminate overthinking completely. You need to reduce its control. You need to stop letting it delay your decisions. Because in the end, progress does not come from perfect thinking. It comes from movement, from taking steps, from learning through experience. So the next time you find yourself thinking endlessly, pause. Ask yourself, am I trying to understand or trying to avoid? And if the answer is avoidance, take action. Even a small step is enough, because clarity is not found in your thoughts. It is found in what you do next. Chapter 9. Your reality is filtered. You believe you see the world as it is. What you see feels real. What you think feels accurate. What you interpret feels true. But your experience of reality is not direct. It is filtered. There is a difference between what actually happens and how you perceive it. Reality is the event. Perception is your interpretation of that event, and your perception is shaped before you are even aware of it. Your brain does not show you everything. It selects, organizes, and interprets information based on what it already knows. This process happens instantly, which is why it feels natural. But what feels natural is not always complete. This is the gap between perception and reality. Two people can experience the same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions. One sees opportunity, another sees threat. One feels confident, another feels uncertain. The situation is the same, the interpretation is different. This happens because of mental filters. Mental filters are patterns in your mind that shape how you interpret information. They are built from your past experiences, beliefs, and expectations. When something happens, your brain does not start from zero. It uses these filters to make sense of the situation quickly. For example, if you believe people are trustworthy, you may interpret actions positively. If you believe people are unreliable, you may see the same actions with suspicion. The event does not change. Your filter does. These filters operate automatically. You do not consciously choose them. They are part of your thinking system. And because they are automatic, you rarely question them. You assume your interpretation is accurate. But in reality, it is one version of many possible interpretations. This becomes even stronger when emotions are involved. Emotions can distort how you see situations. When you feel anxious, neutral situations may seem negative. When you feel confident, challenges may seem manageable. When you feel upset, small issues may seem bigger than they are. The external situation stays the same, but your internal state changes your perception. This is emotional distortion. Your feelings influence what you notice, how you interpret it, and how you respond. For example, if you feel insecure, you may interpret silence as rejection. If you feel stressed, you may see problems where there are none. If you feel confident, you may overlook risks. Your emotion becomes a lens, and through that lens, your reality changes. This is why your experience of the world is not fixed. It is flexible. It changes based on your mental and emotional state. But if you are not aware of this, you may treat your perception as absolute truth. You may assume, this is how it is. This is what it means. This is the only explanation. And that assumption limits you, because you stop questioning. You stop exploring other possibilities. You react based on your interpretation. This can lead to misunderstandings. You may misread situations. You may assume intentions that are not there. You may respond in ways that do not match reality. And because your perception feels real, you may not realize the difference. This is why questioning your perspective is important. It creates space between what happens and how you interpret it. The next time you face a situation, pause. Ask yourself, what actually happened? And how am I interpreting it? This separates fact from interpretation. For example, fact: someone did not reply to your message. Interpretation: they are ignoring you. The fact is real. The interpretation is one possibility, not the only one. By recognizing this, you open your thinking. You allow for other explanations. Maybe they are busy. Maybe they did not see it. Maybe it has nothing to do with you. This reduces emotional reaction. It creates clarity. You begin to respond based on what is known, not what is assumed. Over time, this changes how you think. You become less reactive, more aware, more flexible. You stop jumping to conclusions. You start observing more carefully. You also become more accurate, because you are no longer relying on a single interpretation. You are considering multiple perspectives. This does not mean you doubt everything. It means you understand that your perception is not perfect. It is influenced. And once you understand that, you gain control. You can adjust your thinking. You can challenge your assumptions. You can choose how to interpret situations. Another important shift is noticing patterns. If you consistently interpret situations in a certain way, it may not be the situation. It may be your filter. For example, if you often expect negative outcomes, your filter may be biased toward risk. If you frequently doubt yourself, your filter may focus on weakness. By noticing these patterns, you can question them. You can ask, is this always true? Or is this how I usually see things? This awareness helps you break automatic interpretation. It allows you to update your perspective. Because your filters are not fixed, they can change. Each time you question your perception, you weaken old patterns. Each time you choose a new interpretation, you create a new way of seeing. And over time, this changes your experience. You begin to see situations more clearly. Not perfectly, but more accurately. You respond with understanding instead of assumption. You act with awareness instead of reaction. Your reality is still filtered. That will always be true. But now you are aware of the filters. And that awareness gives you something powerful, the ability to see beyond them. Because when you question your perspective, you move closer to reality, and that changes everything. Chapter 10. You can't control thoughts, but you can control response. You cannot control every thought that appears in your mind. They come automatically. Sometimes they are helpful. Sometimes they are distracting. Sometimes they are negative or even irrational, but they arrive without permission. And this is where many people struggle. They try to control their thoughts. They try to stop negative thinking. They try to force positive thinking. They try to silence their mind. But this approach does not work, because thoughts are not fully under your control. They are generated by your brain, based on patterns, experiences, emotions, and subconscious processes. You cannot stop them from appearing, but you can control what happens next. This is the key difference. Thoughts are automatic. Reactions are optional. A thought appears. Then you respond to it. Most of the time, this happens so quickly that it feels like one step, but it is not. There is a gap. A small space between the thought and your reaction. And in that space, you have a choice. The challenge is that this gap is often invisible, because your mind is used to reacting instantly. A thought appears, you believe it, you act on it. No pause, no questioning, no awareness. This is automatic behavior, and it creates patterns. If you repeat the same reaction again and again, it becomes your default. You start responding in the same way every time, without thinking. This is why change feels difficult, because you are not just changing a reaction, you are breaking a pattern. To do that, you need a process, awareness, pause, choice. It begins with awareness. You need to notice your thoughts as they appear, not after you have already reacted, but in the moment. This requires attention. You observe your mind. You recognize what is happening. For example, a negative thought appears, a judgment forms, a fear rises. Instead of immediately reacting, you notice it. I am having this thought. This creates distance. You are no longer fully inside the thought. You are observing it. That observation leads to the next step. Pause. The pause is where your control begins. Without a pause, your brain follows the usual pattern: thought, reaction, outcome. But when you pause, even briefly, you interrupt that process. You slow it down. You create space. This space allows your conscious mind to engage. It gives you a moment to decide what to do next. The pause does not need to be long. It can be a breath, a second of stillness, a brief moment of awareness. But it must be intentional, because that moment breaks the automatic cycle. And then comes the most important step: choice. Instead of reacting automatically, you choose your response, not based on habit, not based on impulse, but based on intention. For example, a thought says, "I can't do this." Instead of stopping, you continue anyway. A feeling of fear appears. Instead of avoiding, you take a small step forward. An impulse tells you to react emotionally. Instead of reacting, you stay calm. These choices may feel difficult at first, because your brain is used to the old pattern. It will try to pull you back. It will suggest the familiar reaction. But this is where change happens. Each time you choose differently, you weaken the old pattern. Each time you respond with intention, you build a new one. This is how you break automatic behavior, not by controlling thoughts, but by controlling responses. Over time, this creates new habits. What once required effort becomes easier. What once felt unnatural becomes normal. Your default behavior begins to shift. You become less reactive, more aware, more intentional. This process also builds self-trust. Every time you choose your response, you prove that you are not controlled by your thoughts. You show yourself that you have influence, that you can respond differently. And that builds confidence, not from thinking, but from action. It is important to understand that this does not mean you eliminate negative thoughts. They will still appear. Fear will still show up. Doubt will still exist. Uncertainty will still be there. But they no longer control you, because you are not following them automatically. You are observing them. You are pausing. You are choosing. This is real control, not control over what appears in your mind, but control over what you do with it. Another important part of this process is consistency. One moment of awareness is not enough. One good decision will not change everything. But repeated awareness will. Repeated pauses will. Repeated choices will. Consistency turns effort into habit. And habit shapes your life. You will still make mistakes. There will be moments when you react automatically. That is part of the process. The goal is not perfection. The goal is progress. Each time you notice, pause, and choose, even once, you are improving. Over time, these small changes create a larger shift. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your reactions become calmer. Your decisions become more intentional. And your life reflects that, because your life is not just shaped by your thoughts. It is shaped by your responses. And when you take control of your responses, you take control of your direction. You may not control every thought, but you control what you do next. And that is enough to change everything. Conclusion: you are not your thoughts. They may feel personal, constant, and convincing, but they are not who you are. They are patterns, reactions, and automatic processes shaped by your past and your environment. They appear without permission and often without accuracy. But you are not defined by what appears in your mind. You are defined by how you respond to it. This is where awareness becomes powerful. The moment you begin to notice your thoughts instead of automatically believing them, something changes. You create space. And in that space, you gain something most people never use: real control. Not control over every thought, but control over your actions. You don't need to stop thoughts. That is not possible. What you need is to guide your response, to pause before reacting, to observe before believing, to choose before acting. These small shifts may seem simple, but they are powerful. Because every time you pause instead of reacting, you break a pattern. Every time you choose differently, you create a new direction. Every time you act with awareness, you build control. Over time, these small moments add up. They change how you think. They change how you act. They change how you experience your life. You become less reactive, more clear, more intentional. And with that comes freedom. Not the freedom of controlling everything, but the freedom of not being controlled by every thought. Because true control does not come from stopping your mind. It comes from understanding it, from observing it, and from choosing your actions with awareness. That is where real change begins. And that is where your power is. Call to action. Have you ever noticed a thought you didn't choose? Take a moment and think about it. If this audiobook made you more aware of your mind, share your experience in the comments. Your insight might help someone else understand their own thinking better. And if you know someone who struggles with overthinking or feels stuck in their thoughts, send this to them. Sometimes, one idea can completely change how a person sees themselves. If you want more powerful mindset audiobooks like this, make sure to subscribe to MindForge Audiobooks and stay connected, because understanding your mind is the first step to changing your life. You don't control your thoughts, but you control what you do next.